Hey guys, it's Paul. So I got another viewer Yu-Gi-Oh question we're going to talk about today. This is from Fire Doomcaster Projects. He says, when it became possible to consistently one-turn kill and how it changed the dynamic of the game. I remember the first time I saw a one-turn kill back around 2002 or 2003 at a local tournament in the UK. It wasn't a part of the actual tournament. The guy just wanted to see if it was possible to do with a deck he made. I only remember it heavily relying on needleworms. But it happened, everyone was watching and cheering because he'd actually done it. Obviously, one turn kills are very common now and really annoying. Is that inherently a bad thing? What could be done to change it, if anything? So that's a really great prompt and one that I actually have quite a few thoughts on. So let's see. OTKs, a lot of games, Yu-Gi-Oh included, but a lot of games have kind of a premise of like, the one-hit kill, the one-hit knockout. In Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like, can you eliminate 8,000 life points in a turn? In competitive Pokemon, you can like Oko a Pokemon, right? Like just take it out in one hit. It's not uncommon, I guess, in gaming, but in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's a bit of a reverence that it used to have that's obviously gone. So, like this person said in their sort of scenario, their instance, I also remember when the idea of a one-turn kill was like kind of this weird fabled thing. Decks just couldn't do it. I mean, like you just weren't able to special summon a bunch of monsters, and like you pretty much summoned one monster per turn, and like attacked, and your opponent summoned a monster and they attacked. And it was a very back and forth thing. Not trying to sound like a Yugi boomer here. That's literally like it was a slower paced game, and it was fine. And the idea that like a one hit kill would happen just felt weird. And in fact, most of the time, an OTK or I guess by extension an FTK typically was seen as more of like a gimmick. So it was more likely that it was like this guy said, like something with needleworm, like an empty jar type of strategy, or just some weird burn strategy. Maybe it's gimmicky. It's oftentimes unreliable. It just didn't feel like it's something that you're actually really supposed to take into a tournament, but rather just something that's supposed to be like a fun, let's see if it can happen thing. Fast forward maybe 6, 7 years into maybe like the synchro era or something like that. And I think that's probably where it started to get a little bit more prevalent. Maybe right before the synchro era. Let's say that. So that's where you kind of see decks like Teledad or Lightsorn that can in fact like press for game really hard in one big burst. It had existed in the past, but these decks, in my opinion, kind of accelerated it more because you can make maybe multiple synchros in a turn and drop like a Dark Arm Dragon and actually get, feasibly get 8,000 damage on the board. Or, same can be said about like Light Sworns, things like that. I think a specific example that I always think of, though, it's not exactly an OTK, but I think it's a similar part of the conversation, is Shooting Quasar Dragon. So I remember when this card first came out, and Shooting Quasar Dragon was, like one of the first monsters that could like negate anything. I don't remember its exact effect, but that's kind of the gist of it. And it was just very hard to summon. It's like this level 12 synchro monster, and you had to like, make Stardust and like use all these multiple tuners and things. And it was typically played with a bunch of cards that you'd expect to see in like a junk doppel style deck, abusing tokens, lots of different tuners, spamming lots of special summons. And if you got it out in one turn, it was a big deal, but those decks were also seen as extremely fragile. So these were oftentimes decks that, they were seen as glass cannons. They were oftentimes inconsistent. The monsters were really tiny. You could brick a lot. If any one little thing got interrupted or went wrong, like a Book of Moon at the wrong time or something, usually the deck just kind of crumpled because that was just all it could really do was that one focused thing, and that was it. But it was definitely like a precursor of things to come, it feels like, because it was then that we sort of realized as players, I think, or maybe this is just part of the power creep or whatever, that the idea that like, you can have a turn of summon after summon after summon after summon. I know there was a period of time in Yu-Gi-Oh where the idea of like overextending like that was oftentimes the phrase people would use, overextending was sort of seen as the mark of like a bad player. You are exerting your resources and pushing, and you're sort of playing your whole hand out. And if you got hit by a Mirror Force, you got hit by a Torrential Tribute, or like, you're setting all your cards when you get hit by like a Heavy Storm or something, it like you'd lose everything, and then your opponent would just kind of beat you from there because you had no cards left. So overextending wasn't really, it was kind of frowned upon. You're supposed to save your resources. You're supposed to kind of work towards a game state where you could win. Sure, there might be times where you could go for an earlier kill than usual if it seemed like your opponent just didn't have any cards, but there were just so many threats. Gores being another one, actually, that I remember people would talk about a lot. It's like, maybe you shouldn't overextend too much. I want to get back Gores too early in the game, whatever. So, yeah, I think like those were the early days of it, and now it's true that OTKs are extremely, like they're everywhere, right? It's prolific. Many people would honestly say that the OTK doesn't feel special anymore. Every deck can put a lot of damage on the board. Like at least most combo decks nowadays, putting the damage on the board is rarely even seen as the important part. It's really more so people talking about the negates. So like if I go first and I'm playing, some deck that makes, I don't know, like let's say Phantom Knights or whatever, I can make like many different negates and a number of monsters. They almost certainly will total over 8,000 damage. That's like any modern combo deck, tier 1 or tier 2 or anything. Like most decks can do this. So our problem arises, I guess, with the fact that, well, since it's not special and since games end so much more quickly, is that a problem? Before I, march around and say, like, this is so awful, modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Sucks, it's too fast, it's too crazy, I will say that I don't know, is charm the best word? So Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, while it could be said that that crazy style is like everything everyone's doing, I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Has condensed a lot of the interactions today into the one or two turns. So I know people like sort of have this idea of like the simpler times where the games like took, many turns and you kind of set up and slowly played towards like a win condition. And I think people have a certain fondness for that nostalgia and all that. But truthfully, the amount of interactions in the game still feels like it's quite high because of things like hand traps, because of things like, just all of these cards that can still interact with your opponent on their turn, or the immediately powerful cards that can answer a really large board. You kind of find yourself in a scenario where, even though the games are short, they still have the same net amount of interactions. At least that's something that I've heard people say about this. Now, for my personal opinion, I still don't really like where modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is in terms of letting people do so much in one turn. I don't really love the idea that extenders, exist and all of that. Now, I know that's a very boomery opinion to have in this game. I'm not saying I want Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! Back. I'm not about to sit here and pretend like that was, thoughtless either. And I don't really expect like normal summon a vanilla monster and just like beat down. No. I think that, Yu-Gi-Oh's evolution and strategy and stuff is fun. I just really wish that we could have a lot of the fun kind of high octane parts of today's game, but maybe without the raw damage output. You guys have known, I've said in the past that I think that it would be neat to tie Omni Negates to either weaker monsters, like say Herald of Arc Light, right? It's like an Omni Negate, but it's also very weak. It's got like, 600 attack, 1,000 defense. You can just put it in defense mode or something, and people can run over it. So you're sort of forced to quickly get rid of it and like get its negation. And speaking of getting rid of it, I've also said that I think that Omni Negates should maybe come with higher costs. Let's start attaching, more discards to things, or more like this monster has to tribute itself to negate these things, as opposed to just straight up, whatever. So basically what it means is the monsters are either weak and get swung over easily, and they also can't OTK your opponent if they're not able to answer them in the one turn that they get, or the monsters literally will like remove themselves from the field in the process of negating the cards. Even though it's maybe a more controversial example, I think Apollosa is not too bad either, where like it has to reduce its attack to get the negations. Still a little tricky though, because like, it's still Apollosa, it's still very good, but at least the idea that the card's gonna get weaker. Other ways that you can maybe tame these OTKs, though these are ones that maybe aren't as, they're not perfect. I know everybody talks about summoning sickness. I know everybody says that could be like an answer. I'm not really so sure. I'm a big fan of that. And people also want to kind of... Oh, summoning sickness, by the way. Like, maybe a limit of how many summons you can make per turn, or when a monster gets summoned, it can't attack that turn. Some of this would help, but like I know with making a limit to the amount of summons per turn, that just means control decks like Altergeists or Guru Controller Eldritch would suddenly just be like heavily buffed, and people don't really like those. Summoning Sickness, where a monster can't attack on the turn it's summoned. But if you're going first, you can't attack anyway, so like I don't really know. And the combo decks are known for going first, so that's like I don't know if it solves that problem. Making it where people like just can't attack a lot in general, or limit the amount of monster effects they use. They're good ideas on paper, but I don't really know. So I guess to wrap up the whole discussion about it, I would say that while I don't love that Yu-Gi-Oh is so OTK centric these days, I still think that at least it's not so bad, because there are things that you can do to mitigate it, like yourself, hand traps, and the kind of field breaker cards like Dark Ruler No More and Droplets or whatever. But I would like to see Konami take a few extra steps, weaken the monsters a little bit, maybe make them have to like discard more cards or just tie more of a cost to it. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, though. I'd love to hear it. How do you guys feel the whole OTK thing is with you? Does it feel like it's lost its luster, the idea of an OTK? I certainly think it does. And how do you think Konami could maybe fix it? Anyways, it's another user-submitted question, so as always, let me know down in the comments not only your opinions on this, but maybe what you'd like me to talk about next. I'll blabber about Yu-Gi-Oh all day if it's for you. Alright, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.